2009 Yamaha Vino 125 scooter with only 36 miles. Let's get it running.
This is pretty much the worst video ever made.
Napoleon, like anyone can even know that.
Hello my friends, and welcome to Tom's Tinkering and Adventures. Today we are working on a 2009 Yamaha scooter Vino 125, and it only has 36 miles on it. The story is someone bought it, tipped it over shortly after, and let it sit. A guy I know picked it up, and now we got to get it running. I imagine fuel's been sitting in the carburetor. I haven't even really done anything to it yet, so let's take a quick look at it and get started. You can see a couple telltale signs right here. We got a broken brake lever, scratch here, little scratch there, some scratches over here. So that's what our thoughts are. Someone picked this thing up, rode it a little bit, tipped it over, and decided they weren't going to ride it, and it sat around. I don't know anything about these scooters, never worked on one, but every scooter that I've pretty much worked on, your carburetor system is all underneath here. So we'll get in there, see what we got, pull the carburetor out. Well, let's see here. I don't even know. Do you got to pull in the brake? Yeah, maybe this switch over here needs to be, no, that should be. Well, we haven't got any crankage on this thing, so we'll figure that out too. I started pulling this box out here, and it didn't just come out, so I started taking the side panels off, and it looks like we can get pretty good access to the carburetor under this right side panel. So if you're working on one of these, there's a couple of screws. 1, 2, 3. Only 2 screws were in there, of course. Parts are missing, but our carburetor's right here. I also found out why it wouldn't crank. The kickstand has a safety switch on it, so now it cranks over. I put the battery charger on it. Probably don't need that, so we can turn that off. Anyway, I think my next move is going to be, we'll pull this air box off. We'll put a little carb spray in there, just see if she fires, and then we'll pull the carburetor off. Get a little bit of the magic juice in here. And there you go. So I think get that carburetor off, get her cleaned up, and this thing should be good to go. Another note here, after taking off this other little plastic side panel, exposed a few more screws, and that whole front cowl comes off with that seat box. You kind of have to fight it out of this area here, or you can probably take this whole back plastic off too. But now we have a lot more access to the carburetor. So that's where we're sitting. We're gonna get that thing out, get her cleaned up. Not too terrible to get this carburetor out. If you ever work on a scooter, they have a, I forget what they call it. It's an electric choke. There's a name for it, but just follow the wire and unplug that. You can leave it attached. This one also has some sort of a electrical connection on here. I think that is just a sensor. It sends back when the carburetor is cold or something. Don't quote me on that, but just, these are very simple. Unplug them and you can't mess them up. One plug straight into there, one plug straight into there. And it also has a vacuum port right here. It goes to some of the emission stuff. That's the fuel feed right there. So first thing we're going to do is spill gas all over here. And we're going to take the float bowl off. Highly recommend you get yourself a nice JIS screwdriver. Thank you to my brother for that. So let me get the float bowl off. I'll show you what it looks like inside. There you go. That's what happens when you let fuel sit for several years. Main jet, idle jet or pilot jet, your float bowl, or your float, this is the float bowl, your float right here. And you can see this one is stuck. There we go. It set itself free there. That's going to need cleaning. So we're going to remove the jets. We'll remove the float. This one has a pin with kind of a head on it on this side. Some of them it's just a pin that goes straight through. So usually what I do on this one is I'll take a little awl, or if you have a tiny little pin punch, and you want to be very careful, because if you hit this thing too hard, you can break these ears off of here. So you want to be kind of gentle, but it's going to need a little bit of persuasion to push that pin out. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see. You probably can't see inside of there. But that pilot jet, it's way in there. You want to make sure you have a good screwdriver for that. That's all that I use for this. And a lot of times I'll just use another screwdriver to give it a little tap. There you go. See how that pulled that out of there? Might have to get a needle nose pliers to kind of wiggle it on out. There's our float needle. Look at how bad that thing is. Something you want to pay attention to is this little tab that sticks up there. That should have a spring action to it. Push it down with my fingernail, but this one seems to be free, but a lot of times that will freeze up. So you're going to want to either soak that thing for a long time or replace that. I'll show you what I use to get these jets out. A lot of times your standard flat tip screwdriver either won't fit in here or it won't fit in solidly into the jets, and then you'll strip them out, especially one that's been gunked up. So I have this little Motion Pro jet screwdriver kit. It's not too expensive, but that will work the best to get that jet out of there without stripping it out, because if you strip that out way in there, you are going to have heck to pay. Look at that, I'm keeping it clean. I'll 99% guarantee this is why our scooter isn't starting. This jet is completely plugged up. And this screwdriver might be a little too small for this main jet, but we'll see if we can get that out with that one. Yeah, we'll get a bigger screwdriver. There's our main jet. You can kind of see some light through it, but that one's dirty too. And this one, it looks like you can take this off and then possibly remove that seat that the float needle goes in. So we will try to get that out. If we can get that out, that'll be great. After removing that screw and that little plate, just kind of gently pulled that out with the needle nose pliers, and you can see why we want to take that out. Definitely some problems in there. Now I'm going to remove the cover here and pull the slide out. When I first sprayed the carburetor cleaner in here, the slide didn't move. And after spraying a little bit in, it does move now, but you want to be very careful removing this because this is a rubber diaphragm. And usually what I like to do is kind of help push that thing up a little bit. And be very careful with the rubber diaphragm, especially on a machine that's been sitting or an older one. These things can get kind of fragile. And that doesn't look too bad. A little bit of gunk on it. But the main reason I wanted to take that out is because hopefully we can push this inner tube out of here. The main jet kind of holds it in on most carburetors, but if we can push that out, we can clean that as well. A lot of times this will be in two pieces. This piece that we saw inside of there is where the needle goes into, like that. This is called your emulsion tube. As you accelerate, the slide goes up, and then the fuel goes through the main jet, and there's holes in here. So a lot of times that'll be really nasty. And if you can't get that out, it's really difficult to get that area clean. But some remove very easily, some don't. This one just pushed straight out that way. And when you put the main jet in, it tightens that and pulls the whole assembly in. But there's most of our major components on the carburetor removed. So what we're going to do is we are going to put the float bowl and the seat and the jets and the needle. Put all those parts in there for right now. And the carburetor body, which is mostly stripped down. I haven't taken everything off of it, but we got the major components off of it. We're going to put that in my ultrasonic cleaner over here on my messy workbench. So if you can get one of these things, it's worth having it if you're going to do a couple carburetors. If you're only going to do this one time, you can use carb spray. Usually what I would do is just spray a bunch into the float bowl, let that stuff soak, enjoy yourself a cold beverage, and clean the body of the carburetor with the carb cleaner, all this area, flush everything out as best you can, and you can reassemble it. But if you're doing a carburetor more often, definitely look into getting an ultrasonic cleaner. That one was cheap at Harbor Freight. You can buy them online as well. But that thing works pretty good to soak these things up. So all the parts in the body and stuff is going to go in there. I'm not concerned about this. That'll be fine soaking in there. Through the magic of video, you can see everything is clean. And what you want to do with these jets is you want to hold them up to a light source, and you should be able to see through it. You can see through that one. See, everything's pretty well cleaned off. And the only thing I didn't really touch on was this accelerator pump here. So I've got a little bit of carburetor cleaner in the bowl. And you see there's a hole in the bottom. That's where it should pick it up. And then when you push this, it should squirt it out, I think, out of that hole. There you go. So as long as that's working, you don't have to take that apart if you don't want to. I ran water through it, and now I'm running this carb cleaner through it to get the water out. Now we'll reassemble this thing and put it back on the bike. Shouldn't be anything odd about the assembly. Oh, and I'll show you a little test here before we put it on too. Now I forgot to mention the solution that I use in my ultrasonic cleaner is pine sol and water. There's lots of different things people use, but that's what I happen to use. So when I'm done soaking the parts in there, and like I said, it looked like it took 15 seconds on the video or whatever, but it took about 20 minutes. But when I'm done, I rinse everything off in water, then I blow it off with the air compressor, and then I clean everything down again with carburetor cleaner. But now that we're assembled, I'm going to show you a little test to make sure that your diaphragm is working, that you've installed it correctly. So if you have air pressure, you don't want to put 200 psi on this thing. So if you blow a little bit of air into the top part here, you should see that slide go up. And it should go back down, just like that. That means that you've installed everything correctly and your diaphragm is working fine. So now we should be ready to reinstall this. I'll get it on, and hopefully we'll be ready to start this. Okay, we're all reinstalled here. You want to make sure you get your throttle cables on correctly so that when you turn the throttle this way, it opens the throttle. And everything is hooked up. Our wire's there for that sensor thing, whatever that is, I can't remember. This for our electric choke. I think they call that a bi-starter or something, I forget. Fuel line. This has fresh fuel in it, so it's not the whatever 10-year-old fuel. And you want to make sure you hook up your vacuum line here, because that runs this little fuel. It's not really a fuel pump, it's more of a shutoff valve. But if that's not hooked up, you won't get fuel into the carburetor. And since the carburetor was dry, it's going to take a minute. But let's get you set over here and we'll crank. I think what I'll do is I'll spray a little juice in there and give it a head start. Hopefully it'll go. I'm running out of carb clean, so I'm using brake clean, but it should work too. More juice. All right. Sometimes these engines are very particular about running with the air box on, so I'll keep messing with it. If I can't get it to run without the air box on, we'll put it on and see how she goes. Well, I made what may be one of the biggest rookie mistakes ever, and I trusted that fresh fuel meant that we were going to get fresh fuel out of there. As you can see, that's the fuel that's coming out of the fuel line, which I have now plugged up here. And I don't know if that's the fuel line itself deteriorating. It kind of looks like that, but I don't know for sure. Or if that's what's inside of the fuel tank. But I have my auxiliary tank hooked up here, and now we're up and running pretty darn good. I had to take the carburetor back off and clean it again because all that stuff got in there. So lesson learned again. You know, sometimes you have to learn a lesson once or twice. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to drain all the fuel out of here, and we will see if I can see some crud in there or not. We'll figure it out. Well, it's always a challenge to get a light and a camera in the same spot. But yeah, that's what I figured. The inside of that tank does not look good. So we're going to have to do a cleaning on that. And if you search through my videos, I have a procedure to clean a tank out using vinegar. There's lots of other ones, but if you have to clean a fuel tank out, that's a method to do. But I think we're just going to call the video at this, because this was good, basically just let's get it running, and we did that. We have her running, and it runs pretty good now. So that being said, I have a lot more work to do on this, but getting it running part is done. Well, the tank was pretty easy to get off, and it turned out it wasn't as bad as I had made it out to be. It was actually just a lot of like dried up fuel gunk in there. So I took it off, threw in a handful of nuts and bolts and some soap and water, and shook it up 3 or 4 times, dumped it out, rinsed it, did the same thing, and it cleaned up pretty good. The rattling is that thing being loose. The fuel gauge inside of there is broken because it was so gummed up. It was just completely stuck. But it looks like it's not too hard to change. So if we want to get a fuel gauge on here, we can change that later. And notice this thing doesn't have a, what do you call it, trip meter. But anyway, we're good to go now, so I can put it back together. I was going to do a repair on this. It's plastic welding, and if you search my channel for plastic welding, I also do that. So other than that, we got her running, and she's running good. Well, thanks for coming along with me on this journey, getting the scooter running. Appreciate it, and hopefully it helps you out. If you're liking my videos, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment down below. And if you're not already a subscriber, please consider doing so. Thank you very much for watching. Get out there and find your adventure. Adios.